with the water. I just
And it's right behind you.
That's right. All right, I'm going to need that, I imagine, because there's going to be a lot of questions. So good evening, folks. It's a distinct pleasure to be back here once again at the Reformation Society in Rondebosch. My heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Peter Hammond and Frontline Mission. They do amazing work, and it's really something else to be here. I'm honestly very excited to come back. For those who watch my program, you may famously have heard me say I'm never coming back to South Africa. Well, that was not true, but that's because some people were threatening me and just trying to throw them off the scent so I could get back here. And I meet the wonderful people of South Africa. South Africa is Xhosa, Zulu, and Afrikaner, Portuguese, Germans, English speakers, Tswana, Zulu, all the amazing people in this country. It's great to be back here, and I'm happy to see a lot of familiar faces here tonight that I've seen in previous lectures. This isn't really a lecture, it's more a public speaking engagement. I think lecture sounds a little too much academic. So tonight, I'd like to talk to you about President Trump and also talk to you about the tariffs and what's going on with the tariffs. And beyond the tariffs, I'd also like to talk to you about the refugee program. And if there are a lot of questions about that, feel free, but understand we are live, but you're not on camera, just me, so no one knows who your question is coming from. This is kind of warm, I'm going to take it off. Excuse me. Maybe I'm just excited. Could be that I'm just excited. But, so I will tell the refugee program as well. Dr. Hammond asked me if I'm willing to talk about Iran and some other things. I'll answer any questions I can as best I can tonight. Bear in mind that I'm a retired Army colonel, and I was in the intelligence corps in the Army, but I did a number of different things. I was a foreign area officer for Sub-Saharan Africa in my 36.5 years in the Army, starting as a private and working up to a full colonel after I got my commission. I served in Germany 3 tours, in Italy once, multiple combat tours. My first combat experience was in the Gulf War, which was thankfully brief. That went very quickly, thankfully, and we didn't have any casualties. That's good news. And then in Africa, I've been stationed in Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, Uganda, and Ethiopia. So I've gotten around a little bit. I also worked in many other countries in Africa, as I alluded to a few moments ago before we started this. So my background is I've worked in many different organizations. I've taught undergraduate at Iowa State University, postgraduate at the Army War College. I'm a publisher often in academic circles. I'm not telling you this to impress you, just for those who aren't familiar with me, just to understand where I'm coming from. I speak several languages, some better than others, including English. I do pretty well in that one, which is my mother tongue. And so with that, let's go and get started. The first thing I want to say about President Trump is that this is not the guy that ran for office in 2016. This is not the guy that ran for re-election in 2020. President Trump in 2025 is a very different person. I think my lens is a little cloudy here. I think that's better for the audience. We're looking through a fog there. They might think we have a fog machine in here. So I fixed that. So he's not the same person. He survived 2 assassination attempts that we're aware of publicly. There are likely more assassination attempts that never rose to the public's knowledge. So he survived those, including getting shot in the head. Now, people forget he was actually shot in the head. Yes, it was his ear, and like President Trump, I too have large ears. So he was lucky that it caught his ear instead of his skull. But he survived that. Also, he's 78 years old. He's nearly an octogenarian. So he's well aware of the fact that the clock is ticking and that he has a limited amount of time. And then the final factor in this, which makes President Trump different this time around, 2 things actually. The first one is that he knows he has 2 years. And that's why he's moving with alacrity. I have worked 15 to 18 hours per day, every day, since January 15th, trying to keep up with President Trump. His pronouncements, his executive orders, his statements are all newsworthy and all bear analysis and explanation. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And on the flip side of that, the relationship with South Africa has been very much front and present from a South African perspective, not from an American perspective. So of course I report on South Africa and the rest of the continent, so I spent a lot of time doing that. I'm not complaining, don't cry for me, Argentina. I don't mind working 15, 18-hour days. I did spend 36 years in the Army, so I'm accustomed to it. Cat naps here and there, 15 minutes or more than enough sometimes. You see bags under my eyes, and that means that I probably need enough cat naps. But President Trump is really put his foot on the pedal, and he's changing things at a pace that haven't happened in many, many years, probably since the Second World War. The pace of change is just astronomical, and it's quite exciting, depending where you sit. Some people are not so excited. Some people feel very threatened by what's happening with President Trump. But I will tell you that America was headed in the same direction as South Africa until November 5th. Diversity, equity, inclusion, which is racist and bigoted and immoral, had found its way into every aspect of American society, including public schools. It is now being eviscerated and removed, as it should be. I'm not better than you, you're not better than me. We were just born under different circumstances. The fact that I'm pink, I have no control over it. Some say I'm white, but I think I'm pink. I have no control over that. That's an immutable factor that I was born. That's just the DNA that I inherited. Fortunately for me, I also got good DNA for the hair. So I'm 59 again this year. Those over the age of 59 understand that statement. So I'm 59 once again this year, and I still got all this stuff on top, so I'm grateful for that DNA. But whether you're white or you're brown or you're black, you have no control over that. And no one should judge you for that whatsoever. That's immoral, it's racist, it's bigoted. And that had crept into every aspect of American society. For me, I spent most of my military career overseas, so I didn't see it up close and personal, because I was only back in the States occasionally for training or for conferences or a short tour here and there, like when I taught at Iowa State for 2 years. So I kind of missed that this was happening in America because I was in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East much of my life. But when I got back to the States in 2015, I looked around and I didn't recognize things I was seeing. This is not how Americans behave. One of the reasons we left Europe, the European Americans, those of European descent, we left Europe because it was broken, full of monarchies and empires, and kings made decisions arbitrarily and decided what faith you would be and how you would worship and who you would associate with and whether you could ever rise out of poverty or not and whether you were the elite class. People went to America for religious freedom. The state I live in, Pennsylvania, was founded on religious freedom, as was Maryland. Maryland was founded for Catholics, and Pennsylvania was founded for Protestants. Obviously, people of both faiths could live on either side, but that's how they were founded. So people left Europe to go for something better, not just opportunity, but to escape oppression. And the same thing happened in South Africa. Many people left Europe to come here to escape oppression and religious abuse. The Huguenots come to mind. The Edict of Nantes was issued in 1590 by a French king, and it gave the French Huguenots, the Calvinists, religious freedom in a Catholic country, which had been unheard of. And so they practiced their faith for nearly a century until 1680, when a subsequent French king revoked the Edict of Nantes. And when he revoked the Edict of Nantes, the French went on a blood-curdling massacre, killing thousands of their fellow Frenchmen, who were also white, who were also Frenchmen, slaughtering them, raping, murdering, stealing, and chasing these people out. And the Huguenots fled to many corners, to the Netherlands, and some subsequently to UK, and then others came to South Africa, but also a significant number went to Berlin. If you go to Berlin today, the German spoken there is a little bit different than elsewhere in Germany. Of course, Germany is very regional with languages, but there are some French phrases that have crept into the German over the centuries, and that's a consequence of the French influence from Huguenots. In fact, one of the last prime ministers of East Germany had a French surname. So people came to America to escape this nonsense. And the one thing we really escaped by coming to America is the burden of the past. The unique thing about America is that we have never judged our citizens based on what their parents did or where their parents came from. Everybody can rise from their circumstances to be something. Former slaves who were freed after the end of the Civil War, some rose to great heights as politicians in the South before Jim Crow kept them out of the political system. Some became businessmen who were quite successful. Only in America at the time could that happen. Other places today that can happen. But America is unique. We don't carry the burden of our ancestors. We remember our ancestors, some of us anyway. I'm a genealogist, so I know my ancestors, at least I think I do, based on my research. But we don't carry that burden. And that's something that's unfair in much of the world. Europe, that's still the case. If you're a baker, then your son's a baker, and his son's a baker. If you're a butcher, then your son's a butcher, and his son's a butcher. In America, if you're a butcher, your daughter could be an astrophysicist and run Starlink. Imagine that. But that's the unique thing about America. And it's always been a land of opportunity for everybody. Look at the groups that have come to America over the centuries. All have succeeded at one point or another. Why? Because America had resources, America allowed personal freedom, liberty, faith, family, and flag. And that's what America's been about for a long time. South Africa has a very checkered history, especially when it comes to race, as does America. But South Africa has had 30 years to go on a trajectory where things are better. I think we all know that things are not better today than they were. Not that they were good under apartheid. What I'm saying is that the path that South Africa could have taken is not the one it's gone on. So let's get back to President Trump. The reason I mention all of that is that Americans have begun to be viewed based on their skin pigmentation, based on their gender, based on their sexual orientation, and based on their origin. And that's just wrong. That's how you shouldn't judge people. I should judge this young man right here based on the content of his character and his actions, not on how he looks, whether he's devastatingly handsome or hideous looking. I don't think you're hideous looking. Just thought I'd share that with you very quickly. And this young lady back here with the lovely hairstyle, I should judge her on how she behaves and how she treats others, not on how she appears and not on her origin. And that's the magic recipe and sauce of America. And that's been lost. But President Trump is bringing it back in the face of unbelievably horrible propaganda, calling him a racist, attacking him endlessly. You know what's very strange? When President Trump was a businessman, all of his friends were big black celebrities, musicians and rock stars and rappers and developers and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. And suddenly he ran for president and he's a racist. Why are you hanging out with all these black folks if you're a racist? That kind of, they're going to take your card away from you, man. They'll take your Klan card away if you hang out with all those black folks. But people don't even question it. They just hear it in the press and okay, it must be true. Trump's a racist. It's fascinating for me, the opinions I hear about President Trump in America on the street, which are changing for the better now, and what I hear in South Africa, because the media is so powerful. What people see on social media, they believe it. I'll give you one anecdotal story here very quickly before we get back into a few more issues here. When President Trump was in office the first time, he inherited a report from the Obama administration. And the Obama administration had determined that there were people buying passports through places like Comoros. Iranian officials were going, and Iranian businessmen going, because they couldn't go to the UK or the US, they had travel restrictions for ties to terrorism. So they'd go to Comoros, for example, and they would buy citizenship under a different name, and then go to the West. Well, we couldn't prove the provenance of those people, where they're coming from, and passports. So there's an international standard now with biometrics in your passports, and countries, most countries around the world share that data, includes criminal databases, so we know where people are coming from, whether they're criminals or not, and their background. And that information is shared amongst countries. Not every country was doing that, even 18 years after 9/11. So President Bush, who implemented this, and the world implemented this, allowed countries time to adjust to it. Even though the US paid for most of the equipment in countries like Africa, we gave them all the equipment, they still didn't provide information to some countries like Nigeria. And then President Obama gave him a free pass. Then President Bush gave him a free pass for 3 years. And finally, he adopted the measures that the Obama administration had put in place from the State Department, suggesting 6 countries be banned from immigrating to America. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats claimed that Donald Trump was a racist because he just banned 350 million people of color from coming to America. Now they got this figure from the fact that the population of Nigeria is 208 million, add the other 5 countries in, you come up with 350 million people roughly. But a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. President Trump's directive and executive order didn't ban Nigerians from coming to America. If you want to come to America for business and could get a visa, you could still come. If you're a university student, you can still come. If you want to come as a tourist and you can get a visa, you can still come. The only people who are banned from coming to America is those who wish to immigrate and become Americans. And the reason was because we couldn't prove who they were, because their governments weren't cooperating with their passport process. So Trump said, enough of this, we're not doing it. So I did a little research after hearing the figure 350 million people. That's a frightening figure. So I looked it up. The average number of people who immigrated to America from Nigeria and those other 5 countries over the preceding 5 years was 30,000. You see the power of the press? Nancy Pelosi had a press conference and called him a racist, and people believed it. And also, the same day that Donald Trump blocked Nigeria and those other 5 countries, some of which were in the stands, like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, countries like that, the same day that he did that, he also rescinded the ban on Chad, which last time I checked was a majority black Muslim country in Central Africa. So if he's a racist, why would he let the black folks from Chad come to America? You see what happens here? People get part of the story, not the full story. And so that's what Donald Trump dealt with his first term. It's a different world this time, but he has 2 years. He has the House and Senate, which are under Republican control. Doesn't mean he has all the votes. They don't always vote with him. But he has the House and Senate, and ostensibly the Supreme Court is also a conservative body, although I would argue it's not entirely true. Chief Justice John Roberts is not a reliable conservative. He often votes against conservative values, but arguably it's a conservative court. And the White House. So all the levers of the federal government are now in conservative or Republican hands. So Donald Trump has to act now before he loses access to that. Because in the midterms, which occur 2 years after he becomes president in his final term, if the Republicans lose control of the House, then Donald Trump will run into an obstructionist House of Representatives. And there'll be some Democrat who will draft up articles of impeachment. Now remember that an impeachment is not a criminal trial. An impeachment is a political trial. It's how you get rid of a political opponent legally. You can remove them from office. So you don't have to be guilty of a crime to be impeached. And Donald Trump was not guilty of a crime. He was impeached twice in a political witch hunt in his first term. But I guarantee you that if the president doesn't retain control of the House of Representatives in the second year, then we will see in the third year of his administration, they'll start impeachment hearings, and that will be a huge distraction. Thus, President Trump knows he has 2 years. He's got to move with alacrity, got to move fast. So that's what he's doing right now, trying to do as many things as possible. I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit surprised by some of the things the president has come up with, like closing embassies in Africa. That one caught me off guard. That's not something I'm all that much in favor of. Of course, I'm biased, I've worked in many of these embassies in Africa, but I think they're important for our representation. I think that the Doge folks are overstating how much money we'll save by closing embassies. We'll save a lot more money by adjusting Social Security, which no politicians want to hear. They don't want to hear that, but we're going to have to do something. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, and eventually it will collapse the U.S. government. Our debt is so deep, that it's going to be hard to get out of. The only way to get out of it is growth. We can grow our economy, but we have to change things. And one of the smartest things, which is contrary to public opinion, at least in the press, one of the smartest things President Trump has done is come up with the reciprocal tariffs, which is scaring the world. But think about this. Is it fair that South Africa can impose 75% tariffs on our poultry imports in a free trade scheme when we put no tariffs on most of your products? That's not fair, but that's what happened here. And we didn't come after South Africa for that. Most countries around the world apply tariffs or artificial barriers to U.S. products and goods, which keep us out of their marketplace. And as a consequence, between that and corporate executives looking for a fraction of margin of profit on what they're doing, shipping our industrial base to Asia primarily, but also elsewhere, the United States finds itself with a dwindling industrial capacity. It's still 18% of our GDP, or 16%, which is significant, especially in the post-industrial phase. But we are importing things that we should be making at home, and those are costing us tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs, maybe millions of jobs potentially. So President Trump has managed to get billions, tens of billions in commitments for companies to build factories in America simply by threatening tariffs. Look, I'm not a fan of tariffs. I'm actually a free trader. I believe that if people should be able to trade what they can trade, if it's the best product at the best price, then consumers will buy it. Now, that isn't always fair for small countries because they can't compete. But in essence, I do believe in that. I don't really believe in protectionism. However, tariffs, when you're the biggest, baddest economy on the planet, can be very powerful. A couple examples. The president of Colombia, I think it was, we repatriated some criminal alien invaders. No, they're not migrants. They're not immigrants. When you cross our border illegally, or South Africa's border illegally, you are not a migrant. You are a criminal alien invader who's violated the sovereignty of the citizens of this country and of my country. Flat out. Very few analysts, very few journalists will actually make that statement. I'll make the statement because it's a fact. That's not a malicious statement. It doesn't hate people. They can be very good people, but they're breaking the law, and they violate our sovereignty. And it has a very negative impact in so many different ways, with identity theft, with lowering wages for people working off the books, for many other issues, safety hazards for people who aren't fully qualified to build houses, to be electricians and masons and plumbers, and the list goes on and on. Uninsured drivers who are driving around because they're illegal. There's lots of problems with this. And again, many people are very good, but just because you want to live somewhere doesn't give you the right to live there. I'm not a South African. I have no right to live here unless the government of South Africa grants me that permission. And I wouldn't dare cross the border illegally. I come here and I stand up and I obey your rules and laws. I mean, that's only fair. You're a sovereign nation. And we expect the same. You expect the same of visitors. So these folks coming into the country, it's having a major impact. But the tariffs. So President Trump, we contacted Colombia, I think it was Colombia, and we said we have a plane load of these criminals that we're deporting, and they're your nationals. We're sending them back. So whenever a military flight goes somewhere, we have to have aircraft overflight clearance and landing permission before we even take off. So we don't just get in a military plane and just take off. You contact all the countries. So for instance, when I came to South Africa a few years back when I was at African Command, we flew in a small jet. We flew over 15 countries in Africa. Every one of them had to approve our overflight. Otherwise, we had to divert and go around them. We refueled in Chad because it was a small plane. We needed fuel. But that was all part of the plan. So this plane took off and it flew to Colombia. And it got most of the way there when the president of Colombia thought he'd play hardball with the United States. And he'd stand up to Donald Trump, the tyrant. And he said, no, I deny the aircraft landing rights. They can't land here. So the plane started to turn around. They contacted the headquarters. Donald Trump was on the golf course, you might have seen this. He pulled out his mobile phone, taps in a few words. Next thing you know, 25% tariffs applied immediately to Colombia, all products. If they don't relent 1 week, 50%. Within 1 hour, the president of Colombia relented, and the plane turned around and landed, and on top of that, they sent the presidential jet from Colombia to pick up some more criminal aliens and send them back. That's the first instance. Tariffs can work, okay? They aren't always about lowering tariffs. They could be for political gain, that's what that was. Here's another example. For years, Denmark has neglected the maritime security of Greenland and the Arctic Sea. Greenland is a possession of Denmark, although the Greenlanders wouldn't like to be called that, let it be called a self-governing province, but whatever the case is, it's part of Denmark. And for decades, since the Second World War, they've not done their job in patrolling the Arctic seas and the sea lanes in North Atlantic, which are critically important, particularly now with global warming or whatever it is that's causing the sea lanes to be open in the north for much of the summertime. Ships can transit that area now, and there's lots of minerals and resources, and Chinese and Russian ships are sniffing around left and right. And that's a potential threat to global commerce, and certainly to Canada and the United States. So Trump started talking about acquiring Greenland in his last administration. This administration, he got more serious about it and said, well, we'll just invade and occupy them. Okay, that's a bit harsh, but he did say that. Funny little thing happened. Copenhagen, a few weeks back, announced spending $939 million to buy 3 frigates to patrol the maritime waters around Greenland. Now, why did that happen? Because the threat of tariffs and of action against Greenland. And a third case, the Panama Canal has built a great human toll for the United States. Something like 36,000 Americans died building the Panama Canal, for which the entire world benefits. Not just the Americans, but the entire world, not just the Americas. Shorten the transit route through Central America. And that was our soil. We purchased it, admittedly from a new government that was just coming out of colonialism, so we had all the cards and we dictated the terms, but hey, the bullies can do that. So we wound up with the canal zone, which was U.S. soil. And that's, by the way, where John McCain was born, because his father was an admiral. He was born there, but a U.S. citizen because it was U.S. soil, and his father was American. So the canal zone was built at great human and financial cost to the Americans, and we turned it over under President Carter to Panama. After all, it bisects their country. It's only fair that they have control of it, and they've made a fortune off of it. Ships pay a lot to transit there. It costs a lot of money to keep it in shape and keep it functioning, but they make tons of money. Well, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative included plans for the Panama Canal, taking it over. And the Panama government was in the process of awarding tenders, contracts, long-term contracts to Chinese companies. Trump threatened tariffs. China's no longer at the Panama Canal, they're out. So tariffs can affect change, and that's what Trump is trying to do. As far as reciprocal tariffs, people are going, wait a second, South Africa doesn't impose 31% tariffs against the United States. No, none of our products that I'm aware of actually have 31% tariffs. But when you take into account quotas that limit the number of things we can sell here, and artificial barriers, they came up with a calculation, and they figured that it affects about 60% of our ability to come into the country. Basically, what South African government does comes out to 60% tariff for U.S. goods. So Trump thought he'd be magnanimous and say 30%, 31%. We'll do half of that. That got the world's attention. Within 8 hours, Japan and South Korea had trade representatives en route over the North Pacific, flying to Washington, D.C. to talk to President Trump administration to work out bilateral trade agreements. They took it seriously. It's now been nearly 3 months since President Trump's executive order regarding South Africa on February 7th. We've yet to see a South African representative show up in Washington to discuss the political situation and the relationship between South Africa and the United States. Famously, Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, in a Zoom session, said some very nasty things about President Trump and about America, which is his prerogative. But he was a credentialed ambassador, and that was not diplomatic in any sense of the way. And so the radical step of sending him out of the country took place. It's unfortunate. And Kibisa Jonas is now going as a special envoy, and he's also on record as having some very nasty things to say about President Trump. However, he said that in his capacity as a private citizen, so I suspect he'll go there, and he will be probably accepted as a special envoy, but I don't think he'll get the office calls that he's looking for because of what he said. It's impolite to do such things. And now the government of South Africa has decided, according to the media, that they intend to pick a white Afrikaner to be the representative in Washington. I'm going to tell you that from my perspective, that's not a good move. Nothing against White Afrikaners, but it plays to the concept that Donald Trump will only talk to a white person when that's not the issue. The issue has nothing to do with skin color. The issue has to do with temperament. It has to do with the ability to negotiate and also the ability to act on behalf of the President of South Africa. You need a representative there who can speak for the President of South Africa and address the concerns that the United States has. One of the problems we've had of late with this whole situation is that the press in South Africa especially, but also many government officials keep coming at this, that this is all because of Donald Trump, this damaged relationship. Donald Trump came late to this game. The issues that the United States has with the actions of the government of South Africa predate President Trump. In fact, in February of 2024, bipartisan members of the House of Representatives put forward a resolution, a bill, to become a law. Now, it didn't go anywhere because the Democrats control the Senate, so it died there. And even if it had gone through the Senate, President Biden never would have signed it, even with his magical pen when he's asleep. So that never would have become a law. The point here is that Democrats and Republicans are both angry about the actions of South Africa's government with regard to the United States and to our friends, partners, and allies. And there's a whole host of things we could talk about that are, and we could debate whether they're legitimate or not, and the South African government is welcome to debate that. But in order to debate it, you've got to step up and talk to somebody about it, which isn't happening at the moment. And that's unfortunate, because who suffers? Now there are tariffs in place, and there's no trade representative in Washington trying to fix this. So South Africa exported 25,533 automobiles to the United States in 2024. That represents 141,000 jobs directly in South Africa. The cars in South Africa make their cars out of parts that are made in South Africa from other firms. So all the jobs that make the parts, all those people. Plus everyone that works at the factory has got a family, most likely, many of them. 2, 3, 4 other people supported. So suddenly we're talking 500,000, 600,000, 800,000 people, maybe 1 million people or more, are directly affected just by the automotive industry. The restaurants where people eat at, the hotels they stay in, the holiday lodges they go to, the Schnarr, Kinnecore movies they go watch, no longer watch because they have no money. That's not good, and that's unfortunate. Now, that's not directed at South Africa. President Trump, because of what's happening with the automotive industry, is putting it across all automobile imports. But if you had an effective negotiator in Washington, D.C. right now, talking to the Trump administration, you might be able to get rid of that tariff on South African automobiles and make the point that South Africans aren't harming the American automobile industry, not harming at all, which I think is a fair argument to make. And you could save those jobs. But there seems to be no emphasis on that, and it's unfortunate. Beyond that, for a 90-day period, which the clock is ticking on, and no representative from South Africa is talking to the Trump administration, to my knowledge, although I heard rumor that President Ramaphosa called President Trump today. I'd have to follow up on that. That's what I heard. But you know, rumors fly all over the place. The clock is ticking on 90 days, and no one's there yet. And at the end of the 90 days, the 10% tariff, which is across the board with the exception of automobiles at 25%, reverts back to 31%. The United States and South Africa have two-way trade of $20 billion per year, and you have a net advantage. We buy more from you than you send to us, or excuse me, than we send to you. So you have a trade surplus with the United States, which is good for South Africa and its economy. 20 billion, that's 4% of your entire gross domestic product. In an economy that's growing at 1% or less per year, does anyone honestly think that you can take the shock of losing 4% of your GDP in a single year? I don't think so. And we're not talking about people picking bananas and sending bananas, or picking cocoa pods and sending cocoa pods in Nestle in Switzerland. We're talking about people making automobile parts and manufacturing automobiles, and wine as a finished product, and many other things that add benefication of the value chain for South Africans and industry. And from my perspective, it's very disheartening to see this happen to South Africa. And I implore the government of South Africa to fix this. But you better get there fast, because you're finding yourself at the back of the queue. 78 countries have already sent representatives before I even came to South Africa last week to deal with this. So a lot of countries are taking this very seriously, and they should. Look, I don't want trade wars. I don't want these tariffs in place. But it's unfair for countries like China to charge us a 40% tariff for our automobiles when we charge them 2.5%. Of course, we don't buy Chinese cars, but you know, still it's only 2.5% for that. That's unfair. It's unfair for them to limit the number of Cadillacs we can sell there. That isn't right. It's unfair for them to do certain things. And they're not the only ones. It happens all the way. The Europeans love to do that as well. They charge us 10% tariffs for our automobiles in the European Union, and we charge them 2.5%. How is that equitable? Why don't they lower theirs to 2.5%? That seems fair, right? Yeah. But people are protecting their economies. And America has been the chump for too long. Trump's not standing for it anymore. So that's what the tariffs are about, and this reciprocal tariff regime. Hopefully it will come right, and countries will get these tariffs lowered sometime in the near future. But I don't have a lot of hope for some countries, and I'm becoming increasingly distressed about the situation with South Africa. Someone needs to right the ship. Right now, I feel like South Africa's relationship with the United States is a ship listing badly to port. And someone needs to put a counterweight there and swing it back to the center and work with Washington, D.C. South Africa is a sovereign state. South African politicians can say and do what they like. They can have whatever friends they want to have around the world. But you have to understand where President Trump is coming from. You may not like it. You may not like him. Doesn't matter. He's the guy in charge, and he's making the rules. And he's doing it legally and legitimately and morally. So that's just a reality people have to deal with. And you have to find a way to work your way through it. That's why we have diplomacy. That's why we have the Vienna Conventions. And that's why ambassadors are expected to operate within a certain protocol. You don't rubbish your host nation in such a fashion, which Ibrahim Rasool did as ambassador. It's unfortunate. And he'd been to DC before, so he can't claim he doesn't know how it works. He'd been the ambassador previously during the Obama administration. But whatever the case is, it's just really sad to see where the situation is right now. So that's President Trump, that's tariffs, and now the refugee program. Okay. So I do not encourage anyone to come to America as a refugee. And don't come to my house because I have crew-served weapons in my front lawn, and I'll use them. No squatters, okay? No, but seriously, it's heartbreaking for me. Knowing South Africans, knowing whether they're black, they're white, they're colored, they're Indian, how their deep love for South Africa, how much they cherish this country. It's heartbreaking for me to think that anyone would want to leave this country. But for 30 years, we've seen people leave. And let's be fair, at the beginning, there's a lot of white folks in the 1990s who left for whatever reason. Maybe some were racist, maybe some were just concerned or had fear after watching the Congo and Mozambique and Angola. So maybe they had legitimate concerns. And what happened in Rhodesia after 1980, not initially, but it took a while for it to really take effect. And so some left in the 1990s. And that's their prerogative. It was mostly white folks. But after Thabo Mbeki's time in office, a lot of colored folks began to leave South Africa. They go to New Zealand and Australia and the UK. And then black folks began to leave South Africa in large numbers. You can't go to Canary Wharf and throw a rock and not hit a South African. They're everywhere. All that human capital is making trillions of dollars in the Western world, for the Western world, not for South Africa. And I'm not criticizing those people. People have to make a life. You gotta have a living, right? You gotta have safety. You gotta be able to, go home at night and your kids be raised and be able to worship in the fashion you like to worship and be safe in your homes. And that's a problem in much of South Africa, unfortunately. But it's sad to see. And now with the refugee program, an offer that President Trump has made in a rather vague statement. The executive order, by the way, I'm going to rubbish the nonsense in the press. I know you're watching, so take note of this, because I know you guys watch this stuff. I've seen your reports on me. So, and I'm not a right-wing podcaster, by the way. Anyway, so I'm talking to the media now. So, the refugee program, President Trump issued an executive order. There is nowhere in that executive order that says farmer, anywhere. The word farm or farmer does not appear. Agriculture doesn't appear in there. Landowner appears in there. But lots of people own land. Businesses own land. Individuals own land. Farmers own land. Foresters own land. So it says landowners, but it doesn't say farmer, and it also doesn't say white. There's no mention of white South Africans in there. What it says is Afrikaners suffering from unjust racial discrimination. Now, my definition of Afrikaner doesn't match up with many South Africans. To me, there are many colored South Africans who are culturally and linguistically aligned with the Afrikaner community. They're Dutch Calvinists, they speak Afrikaans, and they have much in common with the white Afrikaans community. And so some of them consider themselves Afrikaners, and even Boers, because they're farmers. And there are some Indians who feel the same way, and there are about 300,000 Indians whose first language is Afrikaans, believe it or not, in this country. And there are even several 100,000 black South Africans who culturally could fall into that rubric. So President Trump said Afrikaners. That's the executive order. He subsequently issued a Truth Social post a month later in which he mentioned farmers and expediting citizenship for them, but that's not an order. That's also not a law. So it's just, it's a aspirational thing that he put out there. So maybe farmers will be prioritized, but we don't know. No program exists of record to this date. It's been what, going on 3 months now? So it's been 3 months. So March, April, no, 2 months. We're working toward 3rd month now since he issued the executive order. And we're still waiting for the program to be promulgated and announced. But let me share this. I understand why President Trump did it. My hope would be that if the intent was to help people who are under pressure, that it would address ethnic minorities in particular, but South Africans in general, but that's not going to happen, probably ethnic minorities. And whether it was done to put pressure on the government of South Africa, or it was done just to make a statement, or it was done in good faith, which I believe the last one was what the reason it was done, really isn't germane. It's certainly become a topic of discussion throughout South Africa in the media, which lies about this endlessly, falsely reports it, claiming it's asylum, and saying it's not possible, getting consultants on television and claiming all sorts of untrue nonsense. Well, let me share the following about the refugee program. The United States has a law, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1980. We have been taking refugees and legal refugees, and that's a legal status internationally. We've been taking refugees in America prior to that, but since then, 3.1 million refugees have resettled in America. I ask any of you to tell me where the FEMA tents are that any of those 3.1 million people are living in. There are no FEMA tents, but that's what the South African media tells you, and politicians tells you we're living in a federal emergency management agency tent. They don't deal with immigrants. They don't deal with refugees or asylum seekers. They deal with natural disasters. And no, I'm not talking about the Biden administration. I'm talking about the actual hurricanes and tornadoes. That was a joke. You can laugh now. Okay, so that's a tough crowd tonight. Tough crowd. Oh man, you're making me work for my dinner. Okay, so there are no FEMA tents. That's nonsense, utter nonsense. We have brought in 3.1 million people under a refugee program alone. Normally how it works for refugees is you flee from a conflict or where your life is in jeopardy. A couple examples. People in Darfur fled to Chad and they live in tents and in refugee camps. They register with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, so they're given a status. Many of them have no documents. I mean, they're fleeing from people shooting at them and artillery rounds and rape and murder going on. So they flee. And they don't have passports, they have no identity documents, they just get there. Well, the United Nations will issue identity documents to them. And depending on which country they go, sometimes they issue travel documents for them. Not a passport because they're not a citizen, but they can issue travel documents to allow them to get on a plane to go to Norway or to go to Canada or to the US. So that's how it normally works. There are exceptions, however, because a refugee can only be a refugee when they flee their home country to another destination, a second country, where they receive safety. All right, so Syrians can flee to Turkey and they can be a refugee. But if you flee inside of Syria, you're not a refugee. You're an internally displaced person, an IDP. That's a very different legal status. And so that's you're expected to stay in your country. Hopefully you're safe, but you aren't always. So the refugee program, we take refugees in that are normally processed by the United Nations, because that's what their function is, one of their functions. However, there is an exception to that. Based on persecution or genuine fear for people's lives or their circumstances, the State Department or Congress or the President can identify a group of people based on faith, sexuality, ethnic origin, language, whatever it is, that are the target of discrimination and that their lives are in jeopardy. And that would be the case here in South Africa with whatever an Afrikaner is, which we have to wait for the State Department to define. Now, what you say an Afrikaner is may not be what the State Department says, and it may not be what I say. So what we say doesn't matter. It's what the State Department comes up with and what the President approves. So that's the category here. And in that category, normally under US law, those people won't have to prove that they've been persecuted or attacked because of their status, or that they fear, genuine fear, which is normally the case. To be a refugee, you have to prove that you've been a victim of a crime or of conflict. And then the other piece is that either that or you have a genuine fear that it could happen to you. Here's a good example. If you're homosexual and you live in Syria, you think that's a pretty good place to be a gay person? Don't they drop people off the roof in Syria for being gay? So you have a well-founded fear that your life is in jeopardy. So you could apply to be a refugee and come to America if you fled Syria because of that and went to Turkey or Israel or Lebanon or somewhere like that. So that's an example. So normally you wouldn't have to do that. But we don't know what's going to happen with this program. There have been preliminary interviews that have taken place. The U.S. government has asked questions of those who've come. They're not refugee applications, they're interviews for the United States government to get some kind of feel for what's going on. And in those interviews, they've asked all sorts of questions. Some questions they would ask in refugee interviews, some they wouldn't. And really it's for them to get a feel for it. So I would tell you that those who are interested in the program, it is moving along. Otherwise, we wouldn't be wasting money sending government officials from Washington to South Africa to meet with South Africans to hear what their situation is and assess it. Now, those people may or may not have a leg up on everyone else. We don't know. The odds are, though, they've communicated their situation. They might be calling for an actual refugee interview at some point if they want to go. As far as absorptive capacity, the United States is in the process of kicking 30 million illegal aliens out of the country. That's going to take a long time. 30 million, yeah. Half of South Africa's population. Of course, the media always says 10 million, but they've been saying that for 35 years. It's a lot more than 10 million. The Biden administration alone brought in almost 12 million illegal aliens and resettled them in our communities. Look at Springfield, Ohio, where they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, eating the pets of the people. So, we had a famous line from President Trump. I think the Kifnis made a spoof on that, if I remember correctly. I didn't hear the Kifnis is a spoof, but I've heard that story, and I heard the president say it, which was something else. Anyway, but Springfield, Ohio, which is a town about 58,000, suddenly has 19,000 Haitians. Do you think that's good for social cohesion and for community services, for churches who provide services for the underprivileged or the poor? Suddenly they're just swamped by people who aren't even from America. They're not our responsibility, all dumped in one community. Normally with the refugee program, we being the Department of Homeland Security, will disperse refugees around the country in places where there's absorptive capacity to take new people into the community rather than just dump everybody in the community. In addition to that, we have about 300 non-government organizations which are contracted with the U.S. government, although DOJ hasn't targeted them yet. And they spend about $2.7 billion a year, about 55 billion rand, resettling refugees. So let me also tell you one thing about refugee. If you're interested in that program, it doesn't matter if you're 92 or you're 2 years old. That's not germane. It doesn't matter if you're an astrophysicist who discovered, uranium on Pluto or something like that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're an unemployed street sweeper. It doesn't matter. What matters is your category of who you are and if you're being persecuted. And under the executive order, the way it's written, that would be Afrikaners who are suffering from unjust racial discrimination, whatever an Afrikaner is when they decide. So that's what matters. So, for instance, if you're Tswana South African, odds are you're not going to qualify for that refugee program the way it's currently written. But we'll see what happens when it's promulgated. But a lot of people write to me and say, Colonel Wyatt, but I've got money, and I don't care if you're poor or you're rich. I mean, ultimately, yeah, we love it. If you got billions, bring them to America, put it in our economy. We love that. If you guys are astrophysicists and doctors and nurses, we're going to love that. That's great. You'll find jobs. Unemployment in America is at 4%. 4%. So all the people telling you to never get a job are full of it. People saying, well, you're 65, you can't work. We don't force people to retire at 65. People are saying you're just going to be left somewhere in a tent and you're going to be starving. I challenge you to show me any refugees who came to America in 2024, 2023, 2022, who are on the street begging and starving. You're not going to find them. The people on the street begging and starving American are Americans who failed in one way or another, either for their own shortcomings or because of bad luck or substance abuse or something like that, or because they didn't plan for the future and didn't save their seed corn for the day that they lost a job. There's lots of reasons why people are on the street. And we do have homeless people in America. Many societies do. Certainly here. I mean, I walked around here in the Mother City yesterday and passed people stoned out of their mind in broad daylight. I had not seen that in Cape Town previously. I know it's always been here, but not down in the Central Business District, in a nice, really nice part of town. People just sitting there, I don't know if someone had done tick or mandrax, but just like stoned out of their mind in broad daylight, mid-afternoon. That's sad that people have to turn to narcotics or whatever to, a lot of people have faith in their life, and that helps them get through the difficult times. And those who don't have faith, hopefully have strength of character to help them get through it. But anyway, I could talk all night about the refugee program, but there are probably lots of questions. So that's President Trump, not your father's Oldsmobile, not President Trump we saw in 2016 and 2020. He's a very different man today. And you can see it in his actions. And that's a bit about the tariffs and why they're happening. Right or wrong, that's the reality. I'm not here to say they're good or bad, just tell you what's going on and give you my analysis of them. And then a bit about the refugee program that President Trump offered to Afrikaners suffering unjust racial discrimination. And with that, I've talked for about 44 minutes. So I'm going to take some questions if you have any now. Otherwise, I'll talk till midnight. Sir, I'm going to repeat your question for the audience online because they won't be able to hear it.
Donald Trump, the issue of the ARVs.
Yes.
It's been running on the social media that he wants to stop the aid like to African countries.
Mhm.
So I'm looking to such impact in poor countries.
Okay.
Like even Lesotho
Mhm.
and some neighboring countries that you know where HIV is only a high
Mhm.
rate. What would be the impact of that? And is it true in the first place?
Yes, it's true, but let me explain why it's true and you're right to be concerned about it. It's a very good question, by the way. His question was President Trump's suspension of foreign aid and the impact on the HIV programs through PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. I was in Washington, D.C. when President Bush created this program. What do you think about President Bush? He's a person of deep faith, and his deep faith brought him to this, the human suffering of people from HIV. And as a consequence of that, he prayed on it, and they came up with a plan. From 1983, 84, about the time that we discovered, it was 83, we discovered that HIV was supposedly the cause of AIDS and those illnesses. From that time until 2003, the U.S. government spent something like $642 million total over 2 decades. That sounds like a lot of money. But when this plan was brought about, it was to help countries in desperate need, particularly in Southern Africa, which is where this crisis was way out of proportion, because government officials here ignored people who cautioned and warned them about the long-distance trucking routes, about multiple concurrent partnerships, and about a host of other things that were a perfect toxic recipe for spreading HIV like wildfire in Southern Africa. The problem is that when people like me said that, we were called racist because it was going to affect black South Africans and black Botswana more than anybody else. Race wasn't an issue here. Culture was the issue here, but we weren't listened to. And people weren't warned, and behavior didn't change, and it spread like wildfire. So President Bush came up with this program, and he got Congress to agree to fund it for $3 billion per year for 5 years. Remember, we spent $642 million in 20 years. Now we're going to spend $3 billion a year for 5 years. In 1 year, we will surpass that significantly. That's a lot of money. But there were a lot of people who were complaining about at the time in Washington, D.C., including gay activists who were upset. Well, you're forcing 1/3 to be spent on prevention, and abstinence. Remember the ABC, abstinence, be faithful, condomize? So they were upset about that. And I told the gay activists, I said, dude, we spent $642 million in 20 years. You're getting $3 billion. You're getting $1 billion just to treat people. Shut up. Take the money. Move on. Anyway, Congress allocated $15 billion, $45 billion. $15 billion was what was supposed to be allocated. They allocated $45 billion, 3 times as much money as was planned for in the first 5 years. But the program was supposed to last 5 years. That was 22 years ago. Very few countries have taken responsibility for the HIV crisis fully. One exception is Botswana. In 2000, 38% of adults in Botswana were HIV positive. Now, bear in mind, with the advent of antiretrovirals, people are living longer. So the people with HIV don't die off like they used to, reducing the number of people who are positive. So as new cases become infected, new people become infected, they add to that total. But despite those continuing to live with antiretrovirals, keeping the number higher, the adult population of Botswana, whose HIV prevalence went from 38 down to about 14%, because their programs were very positive, they engaged, they were very active, and were very successful. It may even be lower than 14% now. That's the most recent data I have from UNAIDS. And the Botswana government took responsibility for the program and allocated more and more money over the years. And that started when I was stationed in Botswana from 2008 to 2010. I could already see it. We were giving $93 million a year to help Botswana with HIV, and that got reduced down to $63 million, and got reduced, and the government picked up responsibility. The government of South Africa has abrogated that responsibility and let the United States pay nearly $400 million per year for HIV instead of taking responsibility for it over the past 22 years. So, it's unfair to those who are living off of antiretrovirals, because I don't think the government of South Africa has the resources or the inclination to pick up that slack. But that money was stopped globally for the entire world, all assistance. It wasn't targeted at HIV, but the unfortunate outcome is that it affects people with HIV. And that's very unfortunate and sad to hear that. But is the United States morally responsible for taking care of other people's decisions into perpetuity? I don't think that's fair either. It's not fair to people who need the antiretrovirals right now, but at some point there should have been a warning. The money will stop next year. The money will stop the year after. And maybe that was a more appropriate approach. But for right now, when the president suspended all foreign aid for 90 days to review the programs, officials in South Africa took it personally. They went to the press and claimed that Trump was a racist and was targeting South Africa, which wasn't true. Aid stopped to Estonia. It's a white country. Aid stopped to other countries around the world. It wasn't just South Africa. But officials complained about it and got themselves on Trump's radar screen. And he decided to get no aid ever again. $500 million a year on average. That's 30 billion rand per year that's disappeared. And how do you account for that? Most of that money went to HIV and gender-based violence programs. Those aren't programs I want to see go away. Gender-based violence, abusing people based on their gender. By the way, men are victims of GBV too. That's why it's called GBV, but mostly women, but not just all women. And it's unfortunate, but that's reality. If we had good negotiators, good diplomats from South Africa in Washington talking to the Trump administration, I'll bet you it's possible some of that aid could probably come back. But nobody's there. Did I answer your question, sir?
Yes.
Thank you. It was a very good question. I appreciate that. Next question? So let's just go here and then we'll go to Pauline and Dr. Hanna. Yes, sir.
Could I ask, one of the biggest costs to this country is the brain drain. It's absolutely enormous. We have people who get educated at our universities, some of which are still good, and they're lost to the greater world, and no matter the color of their skin, people, white ones, black ones, brown ones, everybody in South Africa understands everybody else a lot better than the outside world actually believes, and I think you actually said that in one of your talks. And I'm just wondering if there's anything positive that the American government maybe can do to reach out to this country to actually help maintain the people we have here, to build a sane and clever government that doesn't just get itself mired in corruption and excuses and running away from accusations and things. We've just had the this debate go through, and it's actually our government's becoming more sophisticated, and we need the people here who can actually manage all this stuff. Is there anything that you'd like to suggest, and just a discussion point?
So his question was about the brain drain. It's for the audience online, about the brain drain. Is there anything the American government can do to help stem that brain drain and help South Africa? Well, like an alcoholic, the first thing is you have to admit you have a problem. The government of South Africa is not willing to admit there's a problem here. In fact, the reaction is quite the opposite. Every time something comes up, well, Trump doesn't understand. He's misinformed. AfriForum misled him. It's all lies. None of it's true. There's no expropriation. But I can watch SABC and Seshoho, where people are carving up land and laying it out, and then demanding services from Polokwane. I can look to East London. Outside East London, the farms are being occupied there, and the government not evicting people. So whether the government expropriates land or not, the mere fact that the thing was signed into law has empowered people or encouraged them to take the law into their own hands. In the past, when people took the law into their own hands, the government of South Africa habitually evicted those people, even if it took a long time. I mean, we have a whole organization called the Red Ants in Joburg that goes out and beats up residents that are occupying land illegally and robs them and chases them off the land. Anyway, that's what I hear. I don't know, maybe they'll do that. Anyway, that's what the press reports. But you have to admit you have a problem, and the government of South Africa doesn't want to admit it has a problem. They want to say that Trump is the one that's wrong. There's no introspection whatsoever. I mean, if you're never wrong, something's wrong. We all make mistakes. We all misstate things. We all get things wrong sometimes. I was accused of getting something wrong today, despite the fact that I had people that gave me information. And if it's wrong, I'll be happy to admit that it's wrong. Because we all make mistakes. But until you admit you have a problem, you can't be helped. There's nothing America can do right now for South Africa. The ball is in South Africa's hands. They're in midfield, and if they kick it 10 meters and get the ball, rather than kicking it back inside the 22 and retain possession, that's on South Africa and go on offense. But right now, South Africa doesn't seem to be, as a government, doesn't seem to be interested in solving the problem or resolving the breach. But if in fact South Africa wants to, the United States can do an awful lot to help South Africa. We've done a lot. I mean, this is very frustrating. People don't realize the things the United States has done for South Africa for the past 30 years. In many ways, we've enabled the situation that's happening here. That's unfortunate too, if you look at it from that perspective. But $500 million a year on average for 30 years, that's $15 billion in foreign aid. That's a ton of money. And that's a lot of lives saved. And the United States led the charge in trying to get people involved in stopping the spread of HIV. We were key components in that. The United States has been a big sponsor for the South African government with the African Development Bank, with the World Bank, with the IMF in securing loans. The United States gave $300+ million to Aspen Pharmacare to make vaccines for COVID. Yet we get rubbished and we're accused of vaccine apartheid. And we're told that we're stupid and don't understand. I mean, it's an abusive relationship. And we're the abused spouse. And Trump is not going to be abused anymore. He's leading us to the shelter, the women's shelter, the men's shelter, whatever it is. You can't help people that don't want to be helped. And maybe that's one reason why it's on Trump's radar. But you also have to remember this, ladies and gentlemen. Ukraine, Gaza, tariffs, federal deficit, Democrats and Republicans, South Africa's down here. You're not a priority. The fact that Donald Trump is talking about South Africa so frequently, what with an executive order and 2 or 3 Truth Social posts over the past few months, is astounding in and of itself. I will tell you this from Afrikaners. I do meet and greets. I think you all know that. And I've done several meet and greets since I've been back in South Africa. And by the way, thank you to everybody who comes to meet and greets. And thank you all coming for tonight. This is very rewarding, very heartwarming for me, and very humbling. It's amazing that people want to hear what I have to say, even if it's just for a few minutes. But several Afrikaners have come up to me, self-identified Afrikaners. I didn't pull out their ID card to say Afrikaner on it. Speak some Afrikaans for me, show me you go to Dutch Calvinist Church. No, but the self-identified Afrikaners have come up to me and thanked me profusely. I said, "You're welcome." I didn't laugh. I said, "I'm thinking, why are you thanking me?" And they're like, "Well, you've given us hope." I said, "Well, how am I giving you hope?" "Because we've been giving you all kinds of information that's untrue, and you're telling us the truth." I said, "Well, that's kind of my responsibility, is to tell you the truth. People should always tell you the truth. You should do what's right, moral, and just." Right, Dr. Hammond? That was my first lecture here. Right, moral, and just, in the face of injustice. That was because he asked me, "What topic would you like to talk about?" And I related my experiences where people did things wrong or incorrect or immorally, and I refused to adhere to that, and I stuck to my moral compass. It isn't always easy, especially when the crowd goes one way. Trump is going one way, and a lot of people in America are supporting him, a lot of people aren't. So we can help South Africa, but South Africa has to want to be helped. Paul.
Do you think Trump's going to get a deal over the line to broker peace, a lasting peace in the middle, in Ukraine and Russia? Bearing in mind that, I think it was yesterday, his Truth Social, he said both teams are going to be unhappy with the deal.
Okay, so Paul's question was, do I think that Trump is going to be able to get a deal for Ukraine across the finish line?
Ukraine and Russia, an ending of it.
Okay, but for the war in
The
Ukraine,
war,
yeah.
and lasting.
A lasting.
Lasting.
Good luck with that one. What is lasting? 3 centuries? Well, Trump has had enough of both parties. Neither one of them, from my perspective, and I think from President Trump's perspective, actually want peace. The people want peace. I mean, the conscripts in the Russian army don't want to die. The North Koreans who are there don't want to die. The Chinese, who apparently are showing up too, according to some reports, I don't think they want to die either. And Ukrainians sure as heck don't want to die for Volodymyr Zelensky or for Vladimir Putin. Both of whom are wrong. They're both immoral. They're both killing people through their actions and their inaction. Trump has had enough. Remember, he said famously, "I could end the war in a day" when he became president. That was hyperbole, but his point was that he could end the war quickly because, from his perspective, it's a war over nonsense. Well, here's what's probably going to happen. It's something I've said all along since February of 2022. When the night that it happened, I was in Orlando, Florida, for the Conservative Political Action Convention, where I was a accredited journalist, and I covered the CPAC. I arrived at my hotel after midnight, after waiting for them to find the security guard because the key system was broken in my Hilton hotel. They finally let me in. I flipped my laptop open. I was going to turn on to get a shower because it's Florida, so I was all sweaty. And I turned the TV on, and boom, they just invaded. So I went live at 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that, U.S. time, because it was morning in Ukraine, and went on for about a few hours, and people asked me all kinds of questions. And I said, well, this is not going to be a short war. 3 to 5 years minimum. That's what I said in 2022. Go back and check the video. Always check the receipts. You can check my video. I said 3 to 5 years. And I said that the outcome of this is not going to make people happy on either side. What's probably going to happen is that Crimea will eventually be considered Russian territory in perpetuity. They already occupied it, and they're not going to lose it. And the only way to get peace is to cede it to Russia, and probably even the Donbass, and maybe a little bit more territory. And that's probably what's going to happen here. I don't know the outcome, but Trump has had enough, I think, of both sides, neither of which want a resolution. I'm talking about the leadership, not the people. They're being intransigent. And we've given $250 billion to Ukraine. Our entire foreign budget of foreign aid is like 40 billion a year for the world. And we're giving Ukraine $240 billion. Do you know what South Africa, not the government, but what South Africans could do with $240 billion? Pit latrines, what are those? None of those in schools. Schools with books, schools with electricity, ESCOM that functions. Well, you'd have to get different people running it, but anyway, things like that. $240 billion. That's crazy. To kill people. That's immoral in my book. That is immoral, and it's wrong, and it must stop. Now, I'm a contrarian. I've been saying this since the very beginning. Now, that doesn't mean that Putin was right to invade. He was wrong. He didn't have justification. Look, warfare is a legitimate means of political discourse. Sadly, it's a legitimate, accepted means of political discourse when you've been wrong to achieve the right end. But hopefully it's the last resort. And there was no reason for this war other than the intransigence and the arrogance of Volodymyr Zelensky and Putin himself. And thousands, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people are dead as a consequence. It's horrific. And now the entire geopolitical scheme of Europe has been upset. Finland, we have a whole verb in the English language for Finland. Finlandization. Because Finland was neutered and became a neutral country in order to maintain its independence after the Winter War of 1939, when the Soviets invaded them and they defeated them, and then the continuation war when they allied with the Nazi Germans and invaded the Soviet Union just to get their land back. Well, they kept their independence by being neutered and neutral. And they were neutral from the Second World War until Russia invaded Ukraine. And now Finland is part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as is Sweden, another neutral power. Sweden had been neutral since Charles XII, if I remember correctly. I think Charles XII was the last time that they were an aggressor. It's changed everything in Europe, and not for the better. Look, I served under NATO units for much of my career in the military, and I think NATO is a good organization, but it's become a bit of an adventurous organization too, going to Afghanistan, going to Libya, and now, interfering in Ukraine. We have no vested interest whatsoever in Ukraine, other than any of the immoral killing that's going on. Trump is finished with both of them, so I don't know what action he's going to take, but it won't be pleasant. Does that answer your question?
Does he get the deal done?
Does he get the deal done? Eventually, sure. Trump will get it done. He'll get it done. Nobody will be happy, except the people not dying. They'll be thrilled. Dr. Hammond.
How dependent is America really on the rare earth minerals that China says they're going to deny America? China's now said they won't let America get the minerals which they need for everything from satellites to cell phones. Is that legitimate that America really doesn't have an alternative to China? Because I know we've got about 140 rare earth minerals just in the Western Cape.
That sounds like a plug for Western Cape independence. Secession. I'm divining the comments here. All right, so I got my divining rod looking for the water. Oh, there's the rare earth elements and Dr. Hammond's comment. All right, so how dependent is the U.S.? Okay, I think that was your question. So Dr. Hammond asked a question from the back of the room. He said, how dependent is the United States on rare earth elements? Okay, so and can the Chinese really hurt us? For that, I have to go back in time a few years ago, to about 2014, maybe a little bit before that. So there were islands in the Sea of Japan, and yes, Beijing, it's the Sea of Japan, not the China Sea. Anyway, the Sea of Japan. And in the Sea of Japan, these islands or little outcroppings of rocks are claimed by the Chinese communists, but they're Japanese soil and have long been recognized as Japanese soil. So every now and then, Chinese Coast Guard ships will ram into Japanese fishing vessels and cause an international incident. Well, this happened a few times, well over a decade ago, and China was angry that the Japanese responded in whatever fashion they responded. I don't recall what they said or did, but they weren't happy with it. So the Chinese were clever. They have a lot of rare earth elements in China itself. Now, I should first dispel the notion about rare earths. They're not rare. They're rare in concentration. So there's a lot of rare earth elements all over the planet, but you have to dig up tons of soil and rock just to get a small amount. So you denude the landscape, you do huge ecological damage by mining these things. So let's make sure that it's not that there aren't much, it's just that it causes so much damage and it costs so much money to get a small amount. And they're incredibly valuable. This whole series of elements that are considered rare earth elements. So the Chinese were clever. They went around the planet and they bought up one mine after another mine all over the world. And by the year 2010 or thereabouts, maybe a little before that, they controlled 95% of all rare earth element production on the planet. So a funny thing about electric cars, which I'm not a big fan of, by the way, a funny thing about electric cars is that they're heavily dependent on rare earth elements, as are many components in cell phones and modern telecommunications equipment and things like that. So Japan was producing the Prius from Toyota and a couple other manufacturers making other electric cars, and they were really taking off. And the Chinese decided to punish the Japanese. They cut off the shipment of all rare earth elements to Japan. Well, this caused a serious problem for the Japanese car manufacturers. They can't get the materials they make for the batteries, for the cars, for the components, for the cables, all the things they need to make it work. So what do? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, is it not? Necessity is the mother of invention. So Japanese engineers got to work and looking for alternatives, and within a matter of months, they came up with alternative ways to use existing materials that weren't dependent on the Chinese rare earth. So guess what the Chinese did? They aced themselves out of a lucrative market in Japan. Now the Japanese don't buy rare earth elements for those cars anymore. They use alternative materials. And the United States is in a similar situation. We have very talented engineers, and they can do the same thing. Plus, we've learned a lesson from the Japanese. So yes, the Chinese control most rare earth element production on the planet, but using that as a weapon is a very dangerous situation. Also, you know, in today's modern age, if you hold back minerals like that, it's almost an act of war. You know, an embargo or something like that, particularly in the world's economy where people are dependent on those things. So that's a very dangerous road to go down. The Chinese will threaten to do that. I don't think they would ever do that to the US because they cut their own throats. If they do that, then we'll simply ban all imports from China. Americans will suffer, but not like the Chinese will suffer. They will suffer immensely. We can produce enough food to feed ourselves, they'll starve to death. The Chinese can't produce enough food to feed their 1.5 billion people. They import massive amounts of grain and other foodstuffs from around the world, including the United States. They can't produce enough energy. They're the world's worst pollution emitter by a wide margin. They surpassed the United States well over a decade ago, and they've gone way beyond our worst ever year of pollution production. They produce 350 coal-fired power plants every year, yet they run around and act like they're green energy guys because they have nuclear power and wind and solar and all that, but they're going for whatever. Now look, I'm not criticizing them. They've got an economy, they've got to get energy, but don't pretend that you're something that you're not. You're great and wondrous green warriors because they're not. But I think that China wields that weapon at their own peril, Dr. Hammond. But we are vulnerable to it, that's correct.
Could I follow up with
Yes, sir.
one about-
You follow up and then we'll go over here.
The Cape is famous for being a strategic sea route. Even Ronald Reagan has mentioned that in his 1986 speech when he vetoed the sanctions on South Africa. How serious is the threat to the Red Sea, Suez Canal maritime traffic? Because the last time they blocked up the Suez Canal, the Cape had a boom town time as traffic had to come around the Cape Sea route. It looks like there's a threat from Iran and all the Houthis on the Mediterranean, Suez Canal, Red Sea traffic. Could that be threatened, and could we see an increase in traffic around the Cape as a result?
So Dr. Hammond's question from the back of the room was about the Cape Sea route and also the Suez Canal and the potential threats to Suez. Of course, remember famously not just the Houthis, but a ship crashed into the side of the Suez Canal. Remember that?
Yeah.
And that took some time to sort out, and that had a massive impact on global shipping. So I think ultimately the question is, I think what you're getting at, if I'm wrong, correct me, how important is the Cape Sea route to global shipping?
Yes.
Okay.
And it could increase because of what's going on in the Red Sea right now.
And I would tell you that if your ports were functional and operating properly, it would be a big boon for South Africa. But right now, those ships just say, hey, look at South Africa. And they go right past South Africa because you have the worst managed ports on the planet. That's not Wyatt's assessment. That's the organization that assesses ports internationally. You're ranked 78 out of countries that have major ports, out of 78 countries. Transnet, you need to get with it. It's not working. So the Cape Sea route, Joel Pollack famously has said when he was commenting on this, who's from Breitbart and was aspiring to be the ambassador here before Brent Brazell was named. Joel Pollack has talked about the importance of Simonstown as a naval base. Well, I'm here to rubbish that. Simonstown doesn't matter one iota, unless a nefarious actor gains control of it. If the South African government grants access to some nefarious actor who has the ability to project power, but at the moment, no nefarious actor has the ability to project power this far south, this far away from the home base effectively. They'd be isolated and cut off very easily. The United States is the only maritime power on the planet that can project its power to the Cape of Good Hope. We can do that easily. We spend a lot of money on our Navy. The United States, in many ways, protects the global sea lanes and lines of communication the way the British Navy did for global commerce for centuries. But the British Navy is, sorry Britain, is a joke. They really can't project any power. Their last shot was the Falklands, and they had to borrow commercial ships to pull that off. They did, it's true. The U.S. Army has 10,000 ships. Did you know that? The United States Army has 10,000 ships. I said Army, I didn't say Navy. We have 10,000 ships that we maintain in a reserve fleet for wartime. That's a lot of ships. Now, our active Navy only has about 340 ships. So, a little bit different. But those ones have missiles and cannons and all kinds of weapons. The Army's fleet is just for transport. So, Simonstown and the Cape of Good Hope only become important when a nefarious actor is here. No one has submarines operating here that are going to threaten commercial shipping. No one has a projection that's threatening commercial shipping. Piracy has made its way down to the Straits of Mozambique, and I warned about that a few years before it happened. I told the African command, this is going to happen. They didn't listen to me. I was a lieutenant colonel. What do I know? Well, I was right, and eventually they woke up to that reality. But that hasn't been the case this far south. In fact, you know, the biggest navy to come to South Africa in centuries has been Jan van Riebeck. His navy was bigger than the South African Navy today. So I hear. Poor Jan, he's blamed for everything, but he's a hell of a naval commander. Yeah, a big fleet out there. Anyway, but seriously, no, I think the bigger fleet was the Brits when they came and took possession of the Cape, and then a Dutch fleet came, but a British fleet came. And anyway, what's that? Awesome. Yeah. So anyway, I'll get to you in just a second, sir. So yeah, Jan had. That's probably the last time it mattered. No, it's not the last time it mattered, but in my view, the Cape of Good Hope is not a critical issue unless a nefarious actor is here. But it does warrant strategically paying attention to what's going on. And certainly on the part of the United States and Japan and Western nations, what's happening around the Cape of Good Hope. My hope and desire would be for South Africa's Transnet to get its act together and improve the quality of your ports so that these ships stop here and refit here, kind of like the Lady R did in Simonstown. Okay, now I'm talking about fuel and medicine and food and things for the ship, things like that. And the sailors come off and spend money, not in brothels, but in ShopRite and in Truworths or wherever, buying things. So anyway, little reflection on history with shipping and sailors. Sir, your question.
Yeah, thank you. What you're speaking of now always amuses me in a country where they keep preaching job creation, when the job opportunities are there, but they are not unseen, mismanaged, broken, some of them purposefully, sadly. My question is that I'd like to hear your thoughts on why a lot of the leadership of our country keep throwing stones at Israel.
Oh, okay, well that's two very different things. You talked about jobs. Do you want me to address that and then Israel or both?
Yeah, no, my question is Israel. The other was just a comment.
Oh, the other was a comment. Well, his comment was that the government keeps talking about creating jobs, but it's not happening. And then Israel. So I'm going to address your comment, okay?
Sure.
First off, governments don't create jobs.
Yeah, thank you.
They do not create jobs. Governments don't invent widgets. With rare exceptions, NASA and the space program is one example, but they work extensively with the private industry, Boeing and Raytheon and others, to develop the space capability that we had for the Apollo program. But generally speaking, governments don't develop these things. It's rare. The Soviets did it, but they murdered scientists left and right to get what they wanted, so it wasn't really an ideal situation. The private sector creates jobs. Entrepreneurs create jobs. 9 out of 10 businesses fail in the first year. That's how business works in a system. Businesses that don't fail, that should fail, steal capital from other people with better ideas and more efficient means. That's why capitalism is the singular best economic system that mankind has ever created. Supply and demand. If people want something, they'll pay for it. It's in demand. If people don't want something, then you get t-shirts that are 3 sizes too large on sale for $5 grand. Okay? But when government creates jobs, they steal jobs from the private sector. Why does the government have SABC? Sorry, SABC, but you shouldn't be a state broadcaster. Why don't you get privatized? And to be fair, in the ecosphere around here, if you look at SABC's on-the-scene news reporting, if you're honest, they're actually pretty objective when they go out and report stuff on the ground. It's the commentary that's biased. But they're more objective, in my view, than some of the private media companies here when it comes to on-the-scene reporting. For instance, only one media company, to my recollection, reported on the land grabs in Seychelles. which is Petersburg, Polokwane. And that was SABC, and they reported honestly. The reporter on the ground talking to the guy, yeah, we're going to take the land because President Ramaphosa passed a law and we demand that the city give us services. We're dividing the land up here. We're expropriating. The SABC guy's talking to him for 10 minutes. And then the report disappeared, but that's another story. Anyway, but why do you have a state-owned broadcaster? That's just silly. The world should be, of the media, it could be the fourth estate to hold the public accountable. I mean, to hold the government accountable. Well, and hold the public too. But to report the facts. You can have opinion, just be clear about it. And when you report supposition, be clear about it. I did a report earlier today in which I said someone purportedly was meeting with someone. I didn't claim they were meeting with someone. I said they purportedly, according to sources, because that's what sources said. And then I questioned why it would even happen, because it didn't make any sense. Anyway, but government doesn't create jobs. It does not create jobs. It steals jobs from the private sector. And and so that's just rubbish. During the Depression of the 1930s, arguably President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, king, he seems like a king. Anyway, Franklin Delano Roosevelt arguably extended our Great Depression by many years by stealing capital from private sector and creating make-work jobs for citizens like the Civilian Conservation Corps, picking up rocks, painting rocks, raking leaves, instead of people developing widgets and building houses and building things of use to the public. So capitalism is the best system. I don't apologize for that. Communism is broken. It doesn't work. Socialism is stupid. And anybody who believes in it doesn't know what they're talking about. And that's my view on that. Your second question is, what about Israel and the government, please?
Yeah, so while the leadership, a lot of the leadership of this country keeps throwing stones at Israel, just your thoughts on it.
They keep trying to do what to Israel, sorry?
Throwing stones.
Oh, throwing stones at Israel, okay. Okay, so his question back was, what do I think about the government of South Africa throwing stones at Israel? Well, I think it's unfortunate in so many ways. You know, I did a video a few years ago, and I was attacked, and YouTube removed it, but it was simply factual. The EFF marched on the Israeli embassy in Hatfield, calling Israel an apartheid state. I showed the video of the march, and then I questioned that. Israel's not an apartheid state. Christians, Jews, Druze, Muslims all live in Israel. They're all citizens of Israel. I've lived in Israel. I've seen these people there. All of them serve in the, well, not the Druze, but without that exception, they all serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. Some Arabs have become generals in the IDF. They serve in police forces, in the judiciary, in the Supreme Court, in the Knesset. Over 100 Arabs have served in the Knesset, including 30 Muslims. They all have property rights. There are no Jews-only zones, Christians-only zones. Now, Jerusalem is a divided city historically because that's the way it developed. There's a Christian quarter, an Armenian quarter, interestingly enough, and a Muslim quarter. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Dr. Hammond, because you know Jerusalem very well. This is correct so far, right?
You're right.
Okay, so you have these quarters in Jerusalem, but that's just an historical anachronism. But people flow in between. It's not like you can't go between these places. But Israel doesn't have an apartheid state. There's no separate development. A young Muslim child, a young Palestinian Muslim child living in Israel as a citizen of Israel can aspire to be an IDF general and can become one if they follow that path, or to be a police officer or a lawyer or a member of the Knesset or a business entrepreneur. So I rubbish that, you know. So it's unfortunate to see the government of South Africa take a position against Israel, particularly when terrorists slaughtered 1,200 innocent souls. And they weren't just Jews. They were Christians. They were Muslims. They weren't just Americans and Israelis. There were Filipinos and Pakistanis and people from all over the world, Poles, UK residents and citizens. Indiscriminate slaughter, rape, and then executing women after gang raping them. Sticking a baby in an oven actually happened. That's not made up. And people try to deny it. But they filmed it and showed it live over social media as they did it, gleefully doing it. And for any government in the world to condone or to make a congratulatory phone call to that organization after what they did is just shocking. And unfortunately, that occurred here. But again, South Africa is a sovereign state. Elections have consequences. People vote for governments or don't vote for governments. Not voting is as big a statement as voting. I've tried to encourage, exhort South Africans to vote. In 2021, I interviewed 45 candidates from 8 political parties and leaders of 6 political parties for the municipal elections. And I encourage South Africans to go to the polls because in South Africa, your country is a little different than mine. In my country, my rubbish is removed by a private company. Now, the contract is made with the local administrative area, but we pay a private company to do it. My water is provided by a co-op that's privately owned. Well, it was privately owned now, but the borough has bought it, but it's run as a nonprofit. And I pay them for my water, and they maintain it. My electricity comes from a private corporation. And since their rates kept going up, I put solar panels in my house, and so my rates are lower now. My point is that our system of governance is very different in many respects than what you have here. Here, you get your electricity, you pay through the municipality, your rubbish is removed, you have police and security services, and all the services you get typically come from the municipality. So if you want to affect change for coloreds, whites, black South Africans, the best way to affect change on a day-to-day basis for the average South African is to change their governance at the municipal level. Because people will see the change. If the ACDP is running NISA, I'm just making up, they're not going to run NISA, but let's say the ACDP is running NISA, that's a Christian party. They're running NISA, and they run it effectively without corruption. And people see services, they're going to go, wait a second, they can actually rule. We should vote for them. And so I've encouraged people to do it, but 31% of South Africans showed up in 2021. We just had the election, and about 58% of eligible voters showed up and voted this time. While the ANC dropped, the DA didn't really gain anything. They pretty much flatlined. The Freedom Front Plus lost votes. ACDP lost a few votes. UDM lost votes. And people just stayed home because people were apathetic. And the argument I always get is that, well, nothing changes. Well, something changed on November 5th in America, didn't it? Donald Trump was reelected President of the United States despite the best efforts to assassinate him, to bankrupt him. Let me talk about that before I get to your question, sir. Bernie Madoff defrauded millions of people, especially elderly people, of their life savings. People living in poverty now, abject poverty, because of what he did as a fraudster, stealing their money in a big scheme in America. He was arrested, arraigned, and his bail was $10 million for harming millions of people. $10 million. Donald Trump was accused of an accounting error as the chief executive of a corporation who didn't see these financial statements at a much lower level. And there was no accounting fraud. What it was is his corporation got a loan from Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank testified at the trial in New York City and said the Trump organization borrowed the money from us. They paid the loan back on time. We made money off the loan. The fact that we gave it to the Trump organization did not mean we did not loan money to somebody else. No one was harmed. No crime was committed. Donald Trump was forced to pay a $475 million bond to avoid going to prison. Now, why did they charge him $475 million? No one's ever had that before. Because they estimated he had $500 million in cash. They wanted to bankrupt him so he couldn't run for president. You see how evil things are? But things changed on November 5th. Donald Trump is now the president. Votes matter. And I know that's hard to convince South Africans of that. If you like ANC, vote ANC. If you like the ACDP, vote ACDP. But then be responsible for your vote and own up to it. If you voted for him, you own it. If you didn't vote for him, at least you voted and you did your best. You got someone else to vote. There was a question here, sir.
In my view, if we look at, let's say, the best option for us as citizens would be that the government stops all these racist laws and stops the communism, because I mean, owning all those state enterprises is part of the communism.
Or at least socialism anyway. Yeah. Whichever.
Yeah. So that would be, in my view, where I'm sitting now, be the best option, if they were to stop that. Second would be, where I'm sitting, is if we can make the Western Cape be independent. Third option would be that Trump decides, okay, let's make South Africa or the Western Cape 51st state of, or 52nd state of America. So, in my view, that's the options. But what chance do you think does President Trump have to try and influence or force or turn the ANC's arm to stop this shit and stop the racism in all those laws and stop the socialist communist expansion?
Okay, that's a multifaceted question. I'll try to answer it and I'll relay it for the audience online. So the gentleman asked something along the lines that, and correct me if I get it wrong as I go, Now, the ANC is relying on a socialist or communist model of state-owned enterprises, and that's a problem. They have these racist laws, as you described, which are oppressing people. And the third one was what's the chances of Trump making the Western Cape the 51st state? That was a 3, correct?
Yeah,
Okay,
around
essentially.
that, yeah.
All right, well, if it was ever going to happen, it would probably happen under President Trump. But I'm going to tell you right now, don't count on the Western Cape becoming the 51st state of the United States. I think that the Zulu Nation will secede from South Africa before you see the Western Cape become part of the United States. It's highly improbable and unlikely. It is an interesting question, though, and some people are talking about it, but I think it's highly improbable such a thing would ever occur. And it would be sad. I mean, the Western Cape is part of South Africa. Hopefully, you can fix South Africa and wouldn't have to take that route. But I know a lot of people don't think that's possible. So the first one is, can Trump do something about? Can Trump do something about the parastatals? Is that or just?
Now about how the government works, about let's say cancelling all those
Racist laws.
racist
Okay.
laws and stopping the communism, socialism.
I understand. So I'm going to be generous and say it's not malicious, and I could be wrong here, but I'm trying to be not objective, but and not fair, but we'll just say for argument's sake, okay? Let's say that the 142 laws that have been identified as racist or racially discriminatory weren't meant to be malicious, but they genuinely were meant by the people who drew them up to balance the scales for historically disadvantaged. My argument is that that's not how you fix things. What South Africa should have done in 1994, and I don't recall if I said this in my previous visits here, but I might have. I know I've said online. There were 3 things, or many things, but 3 things in particular the South African government needed to address urgently in 1994. The first was converting the existing police force, which was very good at protecting white South Africans, by and large. Most white South Africans never experienced violent crime during the apartheid era. That's a true statement. Some did, but most didn't. Particularly some farmers did, but most didn't. And you know, when I tell people a lot of white South Africans were kind of not fully aware of what's happening in South Africa because you didn't see it, you know? I mean, maybe you had some domestic people that came work in your home, or maybe you had people who worked in your business, and then they were gone at night because of past laws or because they lived in good parts of town, and you didn't socialize with them. So a lot of people didn't fully realize what's going on. Now people say, well, that's pretty naive and stupid and untrue. Well, I can tell you Germans that didn't know what was going on with concentration camps in Germany. I mean, lots of Germans didn't know that. I mean, many did, a lot did. But the point here is that I got a little bit off track there. Sorry, senior moment. So why am I talking about this? What was the question again? Oh, the racist laws.
Yeah.
Okay. Really got off track on that one. Sorry. Anyway, but so that's what. So I'm back to my point now. It's kicked back and the hard drive is functioning again. It was buffering there. So the problem is that. Let's assume that they're trying to balance the scales. But the way you balance the scale is not to create a law that's racially discriminatory, which is what these laws are. And I'll give one example, not of a law, but of a policy that was put in effect that was highly racist. And people said, no, it wasn't racist. And in fact, the North Gauteng High Court said it wasn't. Supreme Court of Appeal overturned that on appeal. That was the Tourism Relief Fund during COVID. The Tourism Relief Fund was only for historically disadvantaged South Africans. So basically, black South Africans, because even though coloreds and Indians were historically disadvantaged, they applied and by and large got no money. Well, there was very little money put into the pot, and the money was quickly drained by small businesses. But businesses owned by whites and Indians and coloreds were rejected because, especially whites, couldn't get the money. Well, that's racist. So let me ask this question. Who works at the businesses, the lodges, and the touring companies that are owned by white South Africans? Are the employees white? No. They're South African, first off, right? Unless they've got illegal aliens working there. But they tend to be South African, and the South Africans are black, white, and brown. So you harm everybody by denying that money. It's stupid. It's also racist. But what happened was, what I think was the intent, is that by the time that it was won on appeal, and I think the Democratic Alliance might have been one of the, or Solidarity fought this one too. By the time the appeal was won, the money was gone. Which I find interesting because we just found that 403 million rand is being paid out to the taxi industry right now from that COVID fund. So where's the money that should have gone to tour? Anyway, Trump really can't affect the domestic laws of South Africa. He has no effect on that. And again, South Africa is a sovereign state that has to be changed from within. But Trump can make it very clear that these are things that are anathema to the United States and we don't accept it. And that's what the executive order was about. It was to make the point that what's happening in South Africa is morally wrong from the perspective of the United States. Does that make us right? Well, I think it does, but not everybody agrees with that. So that's the purpose of that. Now, what can Trump do to send the message home? Okay, I'll be very clear to my audience here because I'll be misquoted and people will lie about it. I'm not threatening anyone. Please listen to the words I'm saying. You understand the words coming out of my mouth. The United States government can do huge damage to people around the planet. And we've done it to countries by putting travel restrictions and travel bans and financial bans on people. And if you think they're not effective, talk to Emerson Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF. For 25 years, they've been crying that the United States and UK have illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe. That's a lie. There isn't a single sanction on Zimbabwe. If I want to go to Zimbabwe and invest in a business as an American, my government has no problem with that, if I'm dumb enough to do it. If I want to go to Zimbabwe and live there, my government has no problem with it. Zimbabweans come to America and attend our universities and can invest in our business. However, human rights abusers, ZANU-PF, those who organized the gang rapes of female members of parliament who were members of the Movement for Democratic Change, those who murdered farmers and farm workers or sent their henchmen out to do it, have travel restrictions and banking restrictions, and that's what they're upset about. And so for years, South Africa's government and even SADC has carried the weight, along with other African governments, lying to the world, claiming that we have sanctions on Zimbabwe. We have no sanctions. Show me the sanctions. There's not a single one in Zimbabwe. There are sanctions on state-owned enterprises that are in cahoots with these leaders from ZANU-PF. Now, Mnangagwa is working very hard right now to get rid of that stuff. He's lowered all tariffs on U.S. imports. We can send stuff into Zimbabwe with no duty right now. Smart, and that may work a deal to get reciprocal tariffs reduced or eliminated for Zimbabwe, but it's not going to change the travel restrictions until ZANU-PF begins to obey the rule of law, their own law, and adhere to their own law, and stop the human rights abuses. Those leaders will still be sanctioned. But we can do an awful lot as a country to folks. And that stuff is painful. I mean, if you're a jet-setting global elite from a government and you can just get on a plane and go to London and shop at Harrods, but not tomorrow. Well, that sucks. Where are you going to go now? Tuck shop? It's not the same as Harrods. Sponsored, okay. It's not the same. Can I answer your question, sir? Okay. Anyone else? Dr. Hammond, can I get one of these guys up here first? Because you've had a couple. Sir.
I'd appreciate your thoughts on the ANC being puppets of Russia, China, Cuba, Iran, as a result of their being in support of the ANC during the years in exile, and that they are now demanding payback.
Okay, well, that's a very provocative question. I know the ANC apparatchiks are watching this program, so I didn't say that. This gentleman said that. His name is Don Juan, and he lives in Parklands. I'm just saying. No, but seriously. Okay, so what is my take on the South African government, or the ANC's affinity for the political East, the East Bloc sort of nations, which today would include communist China, which is still communist, Russia, Iran, Cuba, countries like that. Well, it's interesting that the ANC has such affinity for them, because whether you like it or not, whether you agree or not, arguably the United States played a key role in ending the apartheid era as well. We defeated the Soviet Union in communism, at least in 1989 we did. It's come back with an ugly presence in 2025, but we ended the Cold War by defeating Soviet communism around the globe. And that was one of the major reasons that the security state under the National Party made an argument that apartheid was necessary, that the government had to have a security state because of the Svat and the Hui. Well, the argument for the black threat, for many people's minds, dissipated a bit when they looked around at neighboring states like Botswana, where a legitimate government governed well. And the white population of Botswana was close to what percentage-wise South Africa's was, about 8%. And white folks live fine in their Botswana, or their Botswana there. So that argument carried less weight over time. Of course, we could look at the Congo and make the argument what happened there. And so, I mean, it's just a little wishy-washy, but the point is that the black threat that was pushed for a long time diminished over time in the minds of many people. That's a statement of fact, okay? Whether it's true or not, I'm not going to argue. That's not germane. Then the red menace, the red threat, just disappeared overnight. Just gone. So the raison d'etre, as we say in France, the reason for existing for the National Party, evaporated. They could no longer make the argument that P.W. Botha and the security state need to exist to protect South Africans from the red menace. Because in theory, the red menace is gone now. Whether it happened or not isn't the point. But the affinity that the ANC has for the East Bloc nations is interesting because the United States, not only that, but the sanctions which Congress overrode President Reagan in 1986 when they voted it in, had a devastating impact. It's not the reason apartheid ended, but it was a contributing factor. And for a long time, American politicians, Joe Biden, he famously came to Robben Island in Soweto. Have you been there? Robben Island in Soweto. No, it's not. That's what Joe said. I met Nelson Mandela in Robben Island in Soweto. That corn pop's a bad dude. Did you hear that? He said that. Anyway. Robben Island's out here. But anyway, just saying. Anyway, so a lot of American politicians lent political credibility. We gave succor and refuge to ANC and to the Pan-African Congress and to other folks. And American press contributed to this. So America, in many ways, helped bring about the end of apartheid, and some people don't like that, in a much bigger fashion than the Soviet Union did. But they gave Dr. Beetroot in education, and she came back here and told you to take beetroot for HIV. Well, gee, thanks for that. That was great. What a contribution that was to South Africa's future. Anyway, so they also went to Oxford. Talon Bezuidenhout went to Oxford, did he not? So the ANC and the PAC, they went to the West. So why this disdain for the West? It's bizarre in my mind, sir. I don't understand it. It's historical revisionism. Now, I'm not saying we were right in supporting the liberation movement or we were wrong in supporting it. I'm just stating the facts as they unfolded. Now, we also clandestinely supported the National Party in Angola. Anyway, we also did that. I mean, it's and we also, tacitly accepted the government of South Africa as legitimate government of South Africa during that period. So that's on us. We can be blamed for that as well. But for the ANC to simply just ignore history and for the EFF and MK to pretend that they liberated South Africa is a joke. They didn't liberate anything. The National Party surrendered. They gave it up. And they're very poor negotiators. They're kind of like the DA was last year in the coalition. Very poor negotiators. They walked away with very little. And you have a system that's not based on your vote, but based on parties. And George Washington warned Americans about political parties, and he was right. So here it's party over people, time and time again. You vote for a list, a political party, and they pick who your representatives are. At least in America, if we get a bum, we can vote the bum out, regardless of the party you're in. Did you have a second part, or did I answer? Okay, thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
What do you think of the H1B issue that happened just after I think it was in December last year? Could South Africa become like that?
I don't understand what you mean. The H1B visas are for people with highly technical skills. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, Elon and Vivek basically said because Indians have there's a lot of Indians with engineering degrees, we need to bring a lot more of them over.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the young man's question was about H1B visas, which are for highly technical skills like IT and engineering and things like that. And 75% of those visas go to Indian nationals. And I think you're right. Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk said we need more of those people. Well, that's not how Donald Trump feels. He's the president. So that may or may not be expanded. And there are a number of South Africans that fit that bill. They can get H1B, I think. Elon Musk came to America, but via Canada. He went through Canada, so he came to America from that. And we benefited immensely from Elon Musk's presence. So thank you. By the way, we did give back to Trevor Noah. You're welcome. Thank you. He's yours again. And if you want Charlize Theron, we'll give her back too. Just saying, she's available. And anybody, any takers? I mean, she's still kind of hot, but you can have her back. Anyway, but thanks for Elon. We love Elon. I mean, he's a bit of a wackadoodle, but he's a pretty brilliant entrepreneur, so I'll give him that. Did I answer your question, young man?
I just want to know, could South Africa become like what the right thinks of Indian immigrants?
Let me see if I understand. Okay, so are you saying, could South Africa also encourage Indians to migrate here, like a similar program?
No.
No?
I mean, the right, by and large, didn't like the idea of bringing in a bunch of Indians, but more Indians. So could the same thing happen to South Africa, where there's a big backlash against bringing in more and more South Africans.
Oh, okay, now I understand where you're going. So you're saying that there was, the political right was upset that Elon Musk and Ramaswamy wanted to bring more Indians in the country. First off, let me clarify, in the American system, Indians are considered Caucasian, white. Legally, they're whites, even though some of them are very dark. Some are darker than you, sir, some Indians, but they're considered white because from their origin. So I didn't mean to single you out, you were right in front of me, so. He's got a better tan than I do, I'm kind of pink. Anyway, but, so I understand your question now. Would the same thing happen to South Africans? Highly unlikely, particularly if it's related to the refugee program and have no impact whatsoever. I don't think that's an issue. Whether South Africans are white or brown or black, it's not an issue. America needs more qualified people. We have 4% unemployment. That's basically full employment. When you consider that in an economy, at any given time, 1% of the population is physically incapable of working because maybe somebody just had surgery, or they're handicapped, or handicapable, whichever people prefer to use. 1% of people are always in transition from education, graduating, going into the job market, or leaving the job market, or transferring from one job to another because you got a better offer, or people get sacked and redundant, and that's 1% that's always in flux moving around. So 4% unemployment is basically full employment, which is what America has. We have 13 million jobs currently vacant in America. 13 million. That's larger than your entire formal workforce of South Africa. Vacant jobs. Now, some of them are dishwashers and waiters, but some of them are astrophysicists and engineers, especially in the IT field and telecommunications. Did I answer your question? No, sir. Okay. Dr. Henry.
What is the potential of America getting involved in a war with Iran? Because we really, like Donald Trump's no more useless foreign wars and, bring the troops home, defend our own borders. But it looks like America is getting into a fight in the Middle East that might be, is it a possible or potential or probable scenario that America could be in a fight with Iran, and if so, might it go nuclear?
What's the last part? My what?
Might the war with Iran go nuclear?
Oh, nuclear. Well, as far as I know, at the moment, and I say the moment, Iran doesn't have a nuclear capability. However, there's all kinds of rumors out there of engineers currently working there, and I won't say which country they're from, supposedly, or countries that are working with the Iranians to produce nuclear weapons. That's a pretty frightening prospect. This is a country that can't be trusted with global security. It's bad enough the United States, China, France, UK, Russia all have nuclear weapons. That's far too many countries already. The good news is we've reduced our arsenal by an immense amount, but the bad news is we can still destroy the planet with what we have left. It's pretty scary. Nuclear warfare is immoral. The only country in the world to ever resort to nuclear warfare was the United States. We bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But if you put yourself in the historical context of why it happened, I can't morally excuse it, but geopolitically I can understand why it happened. The Japanese would never have surrendered, and the casualties would have been the tens of millions of Japanese, and probably 1 million American soldiers would have died taking Japan to end that war. And they wouldn't have, if we just surrounded Japan, they still would have fought. And so that's why President Truman decided to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it's horrific. To this day, the survivors still, those who are still alive, have lifelong issues of multiple cancers and burns and things. I've been to Hiroshima. It's astounding that we ever did that. I'm not attacking my country for doing it. I understand why it happened historically as a historian, but it's truly end of days sort of stuff. Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And whether the United States intervenes in some fashion to stop that, or another actor in the region, Israel, or someone else, intervenes to stop that, I fully expect that that will be the case. Unfortunately, under the Biden regime and the Obama administration, my government enabled Iran, especially under Biden, by Biden's actions in shutting down our oil and natural gas industry and spooking the energy markets and driving up the price of petroleum to a ridiculously high level. He gave a bonanza to Iran, gave them tens of billions of dollars of oil revenue they never would have gotten if he hadn't spooked the energy markets and undermined global security. And so Iran had plenty of money on hand to finance Hamas and Hezbollah and work on its nuclear program. Will the United States get a nuclear war with Iran? Well, I hope not. They don't have the delivery means, other than a suitcase bomb, if they had one. They don't have the ability to reach America, but they could obliterate the Middle East and Israel. And should such a thing happen, hell hath no fury like the United States scorn. And I don't know what would happen in Iran. And the sad thing is that millions of innocent people would lose their lives. and parts of the planet would be damaged for tens of thousands of years. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But people don't think hard or seriously enough about the issue you raised, Dr. Hammond. This is horrific. I mean, imagine if someone ignited a nuclear weapon in the Cape Flats right now, we'd all be dead in a flash. 2 million people dead just like that. That's a power that a human being shouldn't have. It's morally wrong, morally bankrupt. And will the United States get nuclear with Iran? I think we would avoid it at all costs, and even under Trump. Does that mean we wouldn't get in some sort of conventional entanglement with Iran? I think there's a possibility of that. I mean, in the 1980s, President Reagan reflagged the oil tankers because Iran was attacking oil tankers. And so we put all these oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, or the Arabian Gulf, depending on who you listen to, one side or the other. But in the Persian Gulf, we reflagged all of them with U.S. flags, and then our Navy protected them. So they stopped sinking oil tankers because it was affecting the global economy. So we did something like that in the past, and then, you know, we inadvertently shot down a commercial Iranian airliner. But to be fair, they were sending a squawk code and identification of friend or foe that they were a military jet, and that's why they were shot down from a distance where they weren't visible. That's unfortunate. A lot of people died. But the Iranians got even. They murdered the wife of the Navy captain in California. They blew up her minivan with her and her kids in it to get even with them. But I would hope we could avoid that, and I think we can avoid it, but I don't think that it's off the table that we would be able to avoid a conventional engagement with them. You know, the previous administration, was it Obama, we had we had British sailors detained and arrested by the Iranians, and then I think there are also some American sailors. That's not going to be tolerated under Trump. Someone comes after our military, there's going to be a price to pay. Trump has shown that with when he took out Soleimani in Iraq. He took him out. And the Iranians are still angry about that. It was the leader of the Iranian Republican Guard, the Revolutionary Guard, and they took him out. So I think that we can avoid it. Let's hope that we do avoid it. Next question. Sir, you were up here.
On Facebook, there's a journalist that's now seems like he's fairly agitated because he's now sort of written the second article. Now what the article is about what's happening sort of in northern Mozambique with I think radical Islamist training and army camps and stuff happening there, and he's become increasingly worried about that. So I don't know what your views is on that.
Okay, so in Cabo Delgado province, I presume you're talking about, the northern part of Mozambique. Many, many years ago, I warned about a potential problem in northern Mozambique to the Africa Command. I said that there's a group of brigands, rebels, that are just a bunch of thieves and murderers who are going to cause chaos up there. And that's kind of what they did. And Total was building a natural gas refinery up there, getting the natural gas out of the straits. And they were protected by the FADM. The FADM is the Mozambican Armed Forces. So the police have little presence in the north, the government has little presence, and these people run around with impunity and murder people and rob people. And when they started getting attention, they claimed that they were affiliated with Al-Qaeda or Al-Shabaab or one of those groups. From my perspective, and I don't have intelligence sources, but analyzing what's been going on there for many years, they are not really what they claim to be. They're just a bunch of thugs who've been murdering people and getting away with it because of the lack of security presence in that region. Now, that's my take. Some people disagree with that, but that's my view on it. And as far as the training camps, look, we had claims there were training camps for terrorists here in South Africa recently. Remember that? For Libyans being trained down here. So there's all sorts of things happening in Southern Africa at all different times. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I have no evidence. It may very well be, but I don't have any sources on the ground in Mozambique that could confirm this or deny it for me. But knowing the situation with a lack of governance and security in the region, anything is possible. But a lot of South Africans are concerned about, well, if that comes to South Africa, I have no concerns whatsoever that what's happening in northern Mozambique will find its way to South Africa. You have problems here you have to be concerned about long before that ever gets here. It's simply too far. Yes, ma'am?
I just want to ask you, what do you define as stage 6 of a genocidal?
Well, yeah, there's a scale that's produced which has 8 levels that Dr. Hammond came up with. I've read the scale. I'm not going to profess to be an expert on it, but your question is where are we at in the scale for genocide?
Yeah.
All right, well, let me answer it in this fashion, okay? All right, so I'm not one of those people who talks about a white genocide in South Africa. What I do talk about is horrific, violent crime in South Africa that affects all South Africans. And I do talk about rural insecurity. The disbandment of the commandos was an own goal by the government of South Africa. The commandos were a part-time reserve force, but they were a very effective deterrent to deter people from committing crime in the rural areas. When they were active, they were a good response force to respond to crime on farms and rural insecurity. They also seized tons of mandrags and daga and illegal substances and stopped cattle rustling. The African National Congress made the argument that they were a historical anachronism because they were white supremacists and they were tied to the oppression of black South Africans during the apartheid era. But the commandos date back to the very beginnings of the Cape Colony. This was a Minuteman force that you grab your powder, you grab your saddle, you get your horse, you get your tack, your water, your supplies, and you get on your horse, you go to the next farm, you alert someone, you go to the next village, you alert someone, you form a posse or a commando, and you defend yourself, whether it was against the Hottentots, the Khoi, the San, or the Xhosa, whoever it was. It has a long history in South Africa. We had something similar. We were a militia, and that's essentially what the commandos were. Under apartheid, they were used for things that were not ideal in some cases. But the irony is that when they disbanded the commando regiments, 4 of them were Zulu. The 4 newest commando regiments were all Zulu. And for most of the Zulus in those regiments, the only form of employment they had was the part-time employment they had with the commandos. And their leaders were Zulu, and everything they did was in KZN. And it completely eviscerates the argument that it was a racist organization and that it was bad. So when that happened, rural security became a serious problem. It dropped off. So I've talked for a long time about farm murders, and I reported any farm murder that I can find out about and I can verify. I've talked about the murder of the Bronk family, and I know the survivors, the family members, and what happened. By the way, just got a conviction in that case after several years. The Bronk family was brutally murdered in Northern Cape in 2020, I think it was, if I remember correctly. 83-year-old father, 76-year-old mother, and the daughter, who was 53, were executed by thugs who came in the farmhouse. She went up there to visit the weekend, and cost her life. Her sister is still alive, and it weighs on the family till today. And it was just resolved in the courts. Edward Neumeister, an Austrian immigrant who lived in South Africa for 40 years, had a German-themed restaurant in KZN. During lockdown, an intruder broke into his place when he walked out to get the dogs in the morning and attacked him with a pongo. He was mortally wounded with a wound to an artery that was spurting blood. The guy went into the kitchen to assault his partner, who was in her 60s, and mortally wounded Edward Neumeister, 67-year-old man, rose to his feet, lunged at the attacker, and she escaped. In revenge, the man hit him with the pongo so many times when his daughter came from Germany to identify him, she couldn't recognize his face. This is real. Black cattle farmer in the Free State who had his own butchery, slaughtered, shot in the head at his own butchery. Spent 4 months in a coma in the hospital. Released, he recovered, came out of the coma. A month later, died from complications. A 4-month pregnant Indian woman on the Ayub farm in KwaZulu-Natal back in 2020. 4-year-old and 5-year-old kid, or 4-year-old and 6-year-old kid in the bedroom. They took her in the bathroom, 4 months pregnant, and slit her throat from ear to ear and murdered her for no reason whatsoever, 4 months pregnant. The brutality of this is unbelievable. There is no genocide, but violent crime is out of control. It's horrific violent crime. I will say one thing about genocide, though, and the levels of genocide. In my view, there is an effort at cultural genocide of Afrikaans language in this country and Afrikaans culture. There was no permanent settlement in what is known as Pretoria, named after Anders Pretorius, until the Voortrekkers founded a settlement there. There was no settlement in what is known as Nelspruit, now known as Mbombela, until Afrikaners established a settlement there in the 1800s. If people want to name things after something, that's one thing, but that's cultural genocide. Stellenbosch University, the land was donated in perpetuity on the proviso that the language of instruction would always be Afrikaans. Yet Afrikaans-speaking students are harassed and abused at Stellenbosch, and there's an active effort to eliminate it from the curriculum in favor of English, which is ironic with the Bella Bill. Only 6% of South Africans speak English as their first language. So that means that 94% of students are going to be forced to go to primary school and learn in a foreign language for the first time. That's a huge disadvantage. It's unfair. People should be able to learn their mother tongue, whether it's Venda, Tswana, Xhosa, Zulu, Nu, which is a Khoisan language, or Afrikaans, or English. And so I do talk about a cultural genocide, which is underway, in my view. It's intentional. The renaming campaign is a big part of it. Some of it's just absolutely insulting. Santon Drive being renamed after a terrorist, a plane hijacker. And it's being done, as it's been clear, it's stated by the politicians in Johannesburg doing it to poke the Americans in the eye. And they wonder why we cut off $500 million in grant money every year. It's not hard to figure out. Did I answer your question then? Okay, thank you for your question. Anybody else, or we're going to wrap up? Oh, we have one over here. Dr. Hammond, can I get one last one?
Sorry, since we're talking about genocide,
Well, you're talking about genocide, I'm not. Did you hear that, Nancy? I didn't say genocide. They're listening to my show.
cycling back now to Israel, obviously we
Yes.
have not endeared ourselves to Israel by taking them to the World Court on charges of genocide, which is
Yes.
it's a strong case by the looks of it. And I'm just wondering, obviously Trump is heavily under the influence of the Israel AIPAC lobby and all that stuff. I'm wondering to what extent is that why we're picking up so much flack from America, from particularly being Trump kind of picking on us.
Well, I would argue that Trump is not picking on South Africa. No, I would disagree with that. And that's what's been reported in the press. That's what many South Africans, that's what many politicians claim. But what has Trump done? Are there any sanctions on South Africa? No. Has he banned Americans from trading South Africa? No. Has he forced the American companies that hire tens of thousands of South Africans to work remotely, which many economists don't even take record of? But tens of thousands of South Africans working for American companies remotely and making a living as a consequence of that. No, that's allowed. We allowed you to stay in AGOA even though you're an illegal participant in it since 2018. Since the expropriation without compensation bill was introduced in Parliament, you're no longer eligible for AGOA. Yet you've had duty-free access to the United States marketplace for $3 billion worth of goods every year since 2018. Trump was president in 2018, 2019, 2020. He didn't stop that. Trump has never punished South Africa. What he's done is he sent a message saying that we're not going to tolerate certain things, and you act against our interests, we're not going to be your rubes anymore. Trump has done nothing to South Africa, and including Ibrahim Rasool. What Ibrahim Rasool did, if he did it in London, he would have been PNG. If he did it in Tehran, he might have been executed. No, he would have been PNG. If he did it in Berlin, he would have been PNG. If I did it as the ambassador to South Africa would have all rights to send me out of the country. You don't do that as an ambassador. That's not. So Trump has done nothing to South Africa. Nothing at all. That's my argument. As far as Israel and America's position, groups that are pro-Israel have a lot of influence in Congress. They've always had a lot of influence in Congress, and that's true. And Trump's daughter is Jewish. She converted to Judaism. His son-in-law is Jewish. His grandchildren are Jewish. He's the first president to actually obey U.S. law and move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which was in effect for 5 decades. It finally took place. He has a great affinity for Israel, but he has a great affinity for much of the world. I don't think that Trump is necessarily influenced by a lot of folks in this. I think he's come to his own conclusions about Israel. And your question about the genocide case, if I heard it correctly, I may have misheard it. It sounded like you said that South Africa is a strong case for genocide with that. I would disagree. And you can consider me wrong, but I would disagree. There's a very specific legal definition for what a genocide is. And in my view, and in the view of many legal scholars, what is happening in Gaza is not a genocide. First off, there's no effort to eliminate the Palestinians as a people. Palestinians live and work in Israel, a couple million of them, in peace. So if there were going to be genocide, it'd be like Armenia and Turkey. They'd be rounding up the Palestinians in Israel, and then be crossing the border into the West Bank, Judea, and crossing the border into Jordan, where more Palestinians live than anywhere else, and going after the Palestinians. So I don't think there's a genocide here. This is a legitimate self-defense response, which is maybe a bit over the top and unfair and immoral. That's a fair argument, but that's a different argument. So I don't think that that's the case. Also, I call into question the commitment of South Africa's government to the issue of genocide. In 2019, the Gambia took the first step in this question. The Gambia took the novel approach that a state that participates in the International Court of Justice could take another state where it has no business to the court over a purported genocide. Myanmar. The Gambia took Myanmar to the ICJ over genocide of the Rohingya Muslims. Did South Africa join that case as a friend of the court with an amicus brief? No, they didn't participate. So how committed are they to the concern of genocide? The Rohingya there, the Uyghurs in China. Many argue there's genocide against the Uyghur Muslims in China. South Africa has nothing to say about the Uyghurs being put in prison camps and labor camps and being sexually abused and organ harvesting and executions, arbitrary executions and arrests. Not a word. South Africa had nothing to say about Eritrea and Ethiopia and their bloody war. South Africa had nothing to say about Tigray and the recent execution of conscripts shot in the back of the head by the Ethiopian forces. We have it on video. It's indisputable. And the ethnic genocide taking place against Tigrayans in Ethiopia proper. Because remember, the Tigrayans led the government for many, many years, even though they're from up north. Many of them were in Addis and other places. South Africa is silent on that genocide. South Africa is silent on many other issues in Africa. What's happening in Sahel? So, in my view, the government has no moral high ground to take Israel to the court over genocide. This has nothing to do with what Israel is doing. It has everything to do with who Israel is and who the government of South Africa is acting on behalf of. I don't think they're acting on behalf of South Africans, but they can say that for themselves or defend it. But in my view, that's my view. I could be wrong, but I'm not wrong. It's just, no, look, I mean, if the ANC were concerned about genocide, they would have joined the Gambia's case. It was unique, it was novel. No one had ever done it before. And only because the Gambia did that in 2019 was the ICJ even willing to entertain this case. But I read the other day that it's been tossed back, if I'm not mistaken. I have to research this a little bit more so I can see what's going on. But I know that, look, that's horrific. Innocent people are dying in Gaza. But Israel didn't cross the border and murder 1,200 people. Hamas did that. And unfortunately, there's a sad consequence to it. I wish the war would end today and we'd have peace. And people could live in peace. And I hope that's what happens soon. But Israel did not, by the way, Israel didn't exactly strike back within 5 hours. They waited 3 weeks before they crossed the border and started shelling. 3 weeks, which gave people plenty of time to get out. And they didn't leave. And by the way, why didn't they go to Egypt? Because the border's closed. The Egyptians won't let them in. Now, why is that? They're fellow Arabs, fellow Muslims. Of course, there's a lot of Coptic Christians in Egypt too, but anyway, you get my point. Dr. Hinman, I think that's probably it, huh? Thank you for your question, sir.
Thank you. I think you also have a government that allows hate speech like kill a Boer, kill a farmer, and says it's not hate speech, there's no moral high ground at all.
I think that's a fair argument to
To
make.
say that incitement to genocide and race hatred is constitutionally protected gives them absolutely no moral high ground for anything.
What's ironic is that in 2003, and I have the New York Times story, and I remember this, I looked it up and researched it. In 2003, the courts in South Africa found that the singing of Kill the Boer was hate speech and illegal in 2003. But here we are now, and they've said it's legal.
Somewhere along the line have changed their mind.
Exactly.
Well, you said you couldn't sing kill any other particular racial group and get away with it not being hate speech. But here you've got a genocidal bunch of maniacs leading 100,000 people in a football stadium to sing kill, kill, kill. And they don't have a problem with that, but they want to pick on a reaction of Israel, which, as you say, could have been overreaction, but that's the provocation. You can't mention that without mentioning what Hamas did. And filmed with body cams and posted on
It live streamed it. And the social media companies didn't shut it down when it first happened. I mean, that's how much of the world found out what was happening in southern Israel.
So, thank you very much, Colonel Wyatt. Let's have a time prayer, perhaps 2 or 3 would like to lead us in prayer. Can I ask Anthony if you could conclude once everyone who wants to have a chance to pray. So let's bring these matters before the Lord. And there's tea, coffee, aquila, refreshments at the back. Please join us. Help yourself to any literature on the table. If you